Joining me live is Opposition Leader Peter Dutton. How are you this morning? Thanks for joining us. I might start by asking you about this budget surplus, Labor. Good. I'll start with the budget surplus Labor appears set to announce, around $15 to $20 billion. What do you make of it?
Well, look, I don't think the government can blame the previous coalition government for everything that's going wrong, and they claim credit for everything that's going right. No credible commentator can say that this government's responsible for the surplus that they've achieved. The fact is that when we projected a deficit, we were in the midst of COVID and the hangover of COVID. The thing that saved our country is the resources sector. The Treasurer can't recognise that sector even by name, but the royalties and the company tax receipts obviously have been very significant, and I just don't think Anthony Albanese could credibly take credit for all of that. And it's an opportunity now to pay down some debt and hopefully not put more money into the economy to further fuel inflation, which is what they've done over the course of the last 12 months.
Well, we have another interest rate decision this week. Do you expect the Reserve Bank to hold? And what should be the bank's approach going forward?
Well, Andrew, I hope for the sake of, mums and dads out there who are really struggling at the moment, not just with their mortgages. Obviously, people are really stretched at the moment, but also, there's small businesses, the cafe owners and those people that have got an overdraft that's already at double digits. There's a flow-on effect to small businesses, which can lead to staff being put off and the viability of those businesses no longer being a reality. So there are many aspects to it, and instead of fueling inflation, which is what the government's done now in 2 budgets, they should be looking at ways in which they can put downward pressure on those interest rates. We thought we were done with interest rate increases until the budget came along, and then obviously we've had 25 points since then. Some of the commentators are talking about another 25 or 50, but that really will break the back of a lot of families, and they're already struggling to work out how they pay their mortgages and their insurance premiums and all the other expenses that go along with running a household, particularly with young kids.
Do you think Phil Lowe should go, or do you think he should stay on?
Well, it's a matter for the Treasurer. I think as long as the independence of the Reserve Bank is retained, that's the most important thing. And in the end, whoever the governor is, and I suspect whether it was Phil Lowe or somebody else over the course of the last 12 months, they're just left with no choice, because they've got a government that's just pumping money into the economy. They've got, obviously, sweetheart deals with the unions and massive expansion of the bureaucracy in Canberra. There are many decisions that the government's made, additional taxation that they'll collect over the next 12 months, the money that they're putting into the economy, as I mentioned. All of that is making the work of the Reserve Bank governor much harder. So Phil Lowe's really only responding to the actions of the Treasurer and the Prime Minister, and I think most people have been bewildered at the fact that, you've got to feel for Labor on this front, Andrew. I'll concede this. They are the most unlucky party in history since Federation. The economy sours on their watch every time. Now, is it a coincidence? I don't think it is. I think it's because they mismanaged the economy. Look, Queensland's got debt out of control under Labor. There's no infrastructure delivered. We'll see debt racked up in Dutton, New South Wales. Victoria, the economy there is a basket case.
Mr. Dutton, they're about to produce a $20 billion surplus. It's going to be a record surplus. Is it that? I mean, I know you're claiming credit for it, but shouldn't they at least be congratulated for that? That shows some reasonable economic management, doesn't it?
No, look, we're happy that there's a surplus there in 1 year, and then they go into recurrent spending, which is going to rack up significant debt over the forward estimates and then beyond into the out years. But let's be very frank about it. They achieve a surplus in this year because that's what they've been bequeathed from a coalition government of 9 years. And then when they're on their own over the next 5, 6, 7 years, all projected to be deficits. So let's be realistic about it. If they were serious, they'd have ongoing surpluses, but of course they won't.
Mr. Dutton, didn't you have 9 years of deficits?
Andrew, we inherited, don't forget this, this is what Labor does, they lock in spending into legislation. So when Tony Abbott came to government, when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, and when Scott Morrison was both Treasurer and Prime Minister, we had spending that we were committed to under the Labor government. We couldn't get the changes made through the Senate, as you well know, and that's what happens. Now, you go into a global financial crisis, or you go into a significant event like COVID, without JobKeeper payments, literally hundreds of thousands of people would have been out of work and lost their homes. So yes, we went into debt as a result of that, and it takes time to pay down Labor's debt and to deal with the aftermath of the party. And that's exactly what will happen at the end of this period of Labor government as well. When a Liberal government comes in, we'll have to clean up Labor's mess again. We'll have to start paying their debt down again, and we'll be the adults. It's like coming back to, coming back home after you've been away and the kids have been partying for the weekend. It's up to the adults to clean it up. That's what always happens.
All right. Feels like everyone's an adult government these days. Now, we're 2 weeks away from the Fadden by-election. How are you feeling about your prospects there?
Well, we've got a great candidate on the ground. Cameron Caldwell's been a councillor there for 12 years. He's a small business owner. He was a solicitor before he came into council. He's got a real connection on the ground, and you can feel that as you go around speaking to constituents. He's delivered a lot of projects, job-making projects on the Gold Coast, northern end of the Gold Coast in his division. He's been involved in a lot of activities around supporting youth and getting them diverted from crime. So I think he's a very, very good candidate. He's a person of great integrity, and I'm confident he can win the seat. But by-elections are always tough, and I think he'll be a great representative for Fadden in Canberra.
Is there a chance there could be a swing against you? And if there is, what would you attribute that to?
Well, I think as John Howard pointed out in Aston, people have been to the polls 3 times in 10 months. And, people begrudgingly turn up to polling day every 3 years for a federal election. So people don't like having to go to a by-election and vote again after they've just voted 12 months ago. So there'll be that element to it. And the government obviously is playing tricks and funny games, milking all they can out of the robo-debt inquiry. They're going to dump that inquiry finding a week before election day. There's no coincidence in that. Bill Shorten's been out attacking Stuart Robert and really playing all of that up under parliamentary privilege, I might say. But all of that has to be a factor. But in the end, people know that in a by-election like this, you don't change the government. You can send the government a message in relation to cost of living and the fact that your power prices have gone through the roof under Labor and they're going to go much higher, and that people are now struggling to pay their electricity bills. And I don't think there are many people in Fadden who'll say that they're better off today than 15 months ago when Mr Albanese was, or just before he was elected Prime Minister.
I take your point on Mr Shorten and the timing of those Stuart Robert revelations, but should the National Anti-Corruption Commission look at Stuart Robert?
Well, Andrew, look, my position's very clear. I don't think I can be accused of being soft on law and order matters. I believe everybody should abide by the law. Nobody's above the law. And if there are credible allegations or suggestions, then they should be properly investigated by the police or by the Integrity Commission. So if people have information, instead of trawling it for political purposes through the press, they should refer it to the proper authority, in this case the Integrity Commission, allow them to conduct their inquiry. I note that Stuart Robert has, flatly denied the accusations, the allegations that have been made against him. But if there are credible allegations, they should be referred to the Integrity Commission for investigation instead of, being trawled through the media for political opportunity. And I think the people of Fadden are much smarter than that. I think they see what Labor's doing here. It's a smear campaign, and Cameron Caldwell, our candidate, is above all of that. He's a person who's delivered very significant outcomes for his local community, and I believe that's the type of candidate they'll want as their local member.
You're right, Mr Robert denies it, but are you concerned that it could be prima facie corruption here if it's true that he was set to receive payments while a backbencher for projects getting up from these lobbyists?
Well, again, there are allegations that he vehemently denies, and I don't know anything more than what I read in the press because the government dumps all of this into the media for their own political purposes, whereas they should be referring it to the proper authorities, and that's what I'd encourage them to do if, in fact, they've got the information. And there's a Royal Commission that's taken place, and we'll look at those findings, take that very seriously. But again, if there's a finding of guilt or innocence, that's to be determined through a proper process, which results in a judge and jury process, not trial by media. And in our country, we should remind ourselves, regardless, again, of who you are, nobody's above the law, and nobody's guilty before they're proven innocent. We should get back to the basics here in relation to some of these matters.
All right, nobody's above the law. Well, you made comments on Friday you didn't believe Gladys Berejiklian was corrupt despite the findings of the New South Wales ICAC. Do you accept she broke the rules around disclosure and reporting suspicion of corrupt conduct?
Well, Andrew, my position, I might say, is very close to Chris Minns, the Labor Premier in New South Wales, and I think we've both got a pretty common sense, pragmatic and practical approach. I don't know anybody of higher integrity than Gladys Berejiklian. She did a great job for her state as Premier, and my view is that if there is a finding of serious corruption, that should be a finding by a judge and jury. That is a very serious allegation to make against any individual, and particularly somebody who is as esteemed as Gladys and somebody who served her state with great distinction. So that's what causes me most concern. I just think if matters are to be tested, they're to be tested in a court of law, and you can't just go out there and besmirch somebody's character by making this sort of serious allegation. The word corruption or serious corruption has a particular connotation to it, and it's something that should be tested by a judge and jury.
All right, well, if that's the case, if one of your MPs or former MPs is found corrupt by the NAC, will you be accepting that or saying, let's wait for a criminal trial?
Well, I think the way in which the federal NAC has been worked up, and as you know, it's supported on a bipartisan basis. I pledged my support to an integrity commission from day one of my leadership, and I believe very strongly in making sure that there's transparency and a proper process followed. And when we work with the government, we were very mindful of the failings of the New South Wales model, which again has found people, to be guilty before there's been a finding by a proper process of a judge and jury. And also the delays that are taken. In some instances, people are cleared from any wrongdoing in these integrity commissions. They're not even notified that they've been cleared. And if you're somebody in the public eye, to be referred to a commission and to be assumed guilty before any investigation's taken place, I think it's a travesty. And I think it deters people from coming into politics at a time when we want good people coming in so that we can improve the level of governance and at three levels of government, the quality of people that we have in the parliament.
All right, Mr Dutton, you've been after Katie Gallagher hammer and tongs for misleading Parliament, allegedly misleading Parliament, over an offhand remark in opposition. You have a New South Wales Premier here who's clearly, in my view, breached the ministerial code of conduct, which you would have had to adhere to a similar conduct code as a minister, and not reported suspicious corrupt conduct, and you're giving her a leave pass. Why does Gladys Berejiklian get a leave pass and Katie Gallagher is in big trouble?
Well, with respect, I think you're talking apples and oranges here. Katie Gallagher, without any doubt, misled the Parliament or misled the Senate. That's not an offence that needs to be, tried in a criminal court and beyond reasonable doubt verdict arrived at. That's a nonsense to compare the two. The fact is that, as you know, many of your senior colleagues, in fact, every senior journalist I know of in the press gallery has written that Katie Gallagher has misled the Senate, and the government, through their numbers, has just tried to shut this down. I think Senator Gallagher has, I think she's a good person. I think she's tarnished her reputation significantly. I think in this circumstance, the honourable thing to do is to stand up and say, look, I inadvertently misled, or there was a problem here that I didn't recall, or whatever it was, and put your hand up. That's the right thing to do.
So you're not after her scalp
with a story that's not credible.
So you're not after her scalp. You're not after her resignation,
like everybody else. Well,
what does that mean? Does that mean she should resign, or does it mean she should just apologise?
Well, that's a question for the Prime Minister, Rod. if people have been conspiring in relation to a sexual assault matter as to how they can eke political advantage out of that, then again, I think that reflects very poorly on many of the Labor members. And I know that, a wonderful senator, Kimberley Kitching, had very significant misgivings and concerns about what Katie Gallagher and Penny Wong and others were doing in relation to these matters. Senator Gallagher, in addition to that, has misled the Senate, and there's no question about that. And she should apologise, and the Prime Minister should explain why it is that she keeps her job if that's his decision. But at the moment, they're just saying that black's white, and I don't think Senator Gallagher has any credibility going forward until she resolves this matter.
OK, the Coalition's former NDIS Minister Linda Reynolds told The Australian yesterday that NDIS reform should include consideration of co-payments and means testing. What's your reaction to that? Do you agree with her?
Well, Andrew, in the design of the NDIS, again, we supported the Gillard government in doing that. Bill Shorten was the minister at the time. He's now the minister again of the portfolio. He seems to be at odds with Jim Chalmers as to whether the program's sustainable or what savings they can achieve from it. The starting point for us is that we have a very significant program to provide people support who are in need of very significant support. And people who are profoundly disabled need the support, but the rorts and the allegations of corrupt practices and overcharging, etc., it's taxpayers' money. People work hard for that money, and if you make a system unsustainable, then those people with profound disabilities will be the ones that suffer because they're not getting the support that they need. And any government has finite resources, and the cost trajectory of the NDIS is very significant, which is why the Treasurer has made some of the changes that he has. So Linda's contributed in a constructive way. That's not the Liberal Party policy, but if the government's got sensible suggestions to make, and there are bipartisan positions that we can support so that those who are most in need are taken care of, and we can stop the rorts and rip-offs that are happening under Labor at the moment, then we'd be happy to have that conversation.
Just finally, just a couple of questions on The Voice, a big weekend of action for the Yes campaign. Do you expect that campaign to fail?
Andrew, it's going to fail whilst ever the Prime Minister continues the tricky approach that he's taken. You can't say to the Australian public that we want to make the biggest change to our Constitution in 120 years, and I'm not going to tell you the detail about it. The reality is that the Voice design, which takes 6 months to put together, doesn't start until the Monday after the Saturday when the polling takes place, which is just bizarre. And I think a lot of people, if they've got a hesitation here, if they're a soft yes or soft no, I don't think they can have their query answered because the Prime Minister's not going to give them the detail. He's completely beholden, it seems, to the referendum working group, who doesn't want to give the information out. And you can't just say that this is the greatest moral challenge of our time and then keep your hands in your pocket and start telling these half-truths about what it will do and pretending that a line within the second reading speech of the Attorney-General is going to override the language used in the Constitution. It's tricky by half, and Australians aren't stupid. They can sniff it out. And I think the Prime Minister's created all sorts of dramas here. And if he believes that it's going to be voted down, then frankly, we should just stick with the question of should Indigenous Australians be recognised in the Constitution. We support that. Labor supports it. And I think 80% of Australians would support it, but they don't support The Voice because it will change our system of government. It's permanent, it's risky, and it is going to create all sorts of unintended consequences. And I don't think there's consensus even within the Indigenous community.
So if he changes the question of just constitutional recognition, you're supporting it, and then he can take his chances with a legislative voice. Is that your position?
That's exactly our position. We're very happy to sit down with the Prime Minister tomorrow to work out the question, to work out on constitutional recognition. We're happy. We agree very strongly in principle with Indigenous women and elders in local communities like Alice Springs or Tennant Creek or Laverton or Leonora, where there are real problems, domestic violence, sexual violence, physical violence, to sit down and look at what the Voice would look like in legislation so people can understand it. But when you put it into the Constitution, you can't change it, and there's no law that can be passed in the Parliament that will override it. So if we end up with just another layer of bureaucracy, another ADSIC, it's going to make the situation worse, not better, for Indigenous people on the ground. And, the Prime Minister and Linda Burney and others yelling at Australians that they're not smart enough to understand the voice, or that they're hard-hearted, or that they're racist, or this sort of nonsense, it's dividing the country. The best case for the yes vote is that it can be 51-49, which splits our country down the middle. And instead, with just a question on constitutional recognition, we could have an 80%, 90% support vote for that question. That would be a unifying moment for our country, instead of setting back reconciliation, which is the pathway that the Prime Minister's on at the moment, all because he wants his moment in history.
Just finally, what do you make of these large corporate donations and BHP, Rio Tinto, Wesfarmers, $2 million each for the Yes campaign?
Well, look, I think there are many corporates at the moment, frankly, who lack a significant backbone. There are a lot of people who are just craving popularity and trying to please people in the Twitter sphere. A company like Rio Tinto has done significant damage, and frankly, they're significant damage to Indigenous culture. And instead of trying to deal with these things post the event, they should have had the proper processes in place to stop an event from taking place. So I think there are debates that corporate Australia should be involved in, and at the moment, I don't think they're paying due consideration to the views of their workforce, to the views of the community. I've sat down with Rio Tinto and, for example, they have an excellent working relationship with Indigenous elders in their local community. They provide royalties back into the community, and I think if there's a divide in the view of the voice enshrined in the Constitution and the local voice of the elders that they've got a good relationship with now, that the voice in Canberra will override that. How could that be in Rio Tinto's or that local community best interest? So I think there's, frankly, a lot of business leaders in our country today need to reassess where they are on some of these debates. There are a lot of CEOs and chairs who have very different conversations with you in private than what they say publicly, because they're worried about ESG and remuneration packages being voted down at AGMs, and it's time that they started to stand up for what's in our country's best interests. And clearly, the way that the Prime Minister's proposed the voice and conducted himself in this campaign, the voice is not in our country's best interests. And on that basis, I hope that people can support us in other tangible ways of finding better outcomes for Indigenous Australians, which is what we all desire.